I still remember the exact second my dignity collapsed in front of everyone. The room was loud just moments before, clinking glasses, overlapping conversations, fake laughter bouncing off the walls. Then someone said my name, not loudly, not angrily, calm, sharp, and suddenly the entire room went silent. That kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your heartbeat feel exposed. I was standing near the doorway, half smiling, unaware that I had already been decided on. Every eye turned toward me, some curious, some uncomfortable, some already judging. I felt the air change. My hands went cold. My throat tightened like it knew what was coming before my brain did. What happened next didn't feel real. Something was said about me, something final, something meant to strip me of belonging. I wasn't asked. I wasn't allowed to explain. I wasn't even looked at like a human anymore. I was treated like a problem that needed to be removed publicly. I remember the floor beneath my feet, the way it felt suddenly unstable, like I might fall even though I was standing still. I remember the sound of someone shifting in their chair. No one defended me. No one questioned it. Their silence was louder than the humiliation itself. I searched faces I trusted, hoping for even one person to interrupt this moment, someone to say this had gone too far. But the people I had sacrificed for the most couldn't even meet my eyes. That was when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't emotional. This was planned. I felt exposed, reduced, and erased in a matter of seconds, not because I had done something wrong, but because someone wanted me to look guilty without proof. As I stood there, my mind raced through every memory, every compromise, every time I stayed quiet to keep peace. None of it mattered anymore. Whatever image they had created of me in that room was already accepted as truth. And as I walked away, with my chest burning and my pride shattered, one question kept echoing louder than anything else. If this moment was so carefully staged, what had they been hiding all along? Before that moment, I believed loyalty could protect anything. I had built my entire sense of safety around this relationship, not because it was perfect, but because I made it work. I was the one who adjusted, explained, softened situations, and absorbed discomfort so others wouldn't feel it. Over time, that role became my identity. I wasn't just involved, I was invested. I gave more than time. I gave silence when I wanted to speak. I gave understanding when I deserved accountability. I convinced myself that love meant endurance, that being strong meant not reacting, and that staying meant winning. Walking away never felt like an option because I had already sacrificed too much to leave. This bond mattered because it was tied to my sense of belonging. It wasn't just a person, it was family, history, shared struggles, and promises made without words. I believed that history created protection, that no matter what happened, I would never be publicly disrespected by the people who knew my story. Looking back, that belief was the first crack. There were moments I dismissed too easily, subtle shifts in tone, conversations that stopped when I entered the room, decisions being made without me, then explained as if they were unavoidable. I noticed, but I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself trust meant not questioning everything. I became careful with my words, careful with my reactions, careful not to upset the balance. Somewhere along the way, I started shrinking to keep the peace, believing that compromise would be appreciated. It wasn't. Small boundaries I tried to set were treated like inconveniences. My concerns were brushed off as misunderstandings, and each time I let it go, something inside me weakened. I didn't realize I was teaching them how much disrespect I could tolerate. There was a moment that should have warned me, a casual remark delivered with a smile that made me feel small in front of others. It was framed as humor. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, even though my chest tightened. That was the first time I felt embarrassed without knowing why. After that, things changed quietly. I wasn't included the way I used to be. Important conversations happened elsewhere. I felt like I was being slowly moved out of the center without being told. Still, I held on, because admitting something was wrong meant accepting that everything I had invested in might collapse. I kept telling myself this was temporary, stress, miscommunication, a phase. I clung to the version of us that existed before the distance, before the silence felt intentional. But trust doesn't break all at once. It cracks softly, repeatedly, invisibly. And by the time I realized something was truly wrong, the foundation was already unstable. I just didn't know who was pushing or why they needed me to fall. That's what made what happened next so devastating, because I never saw the betrayal as a possibility. I thought loyalty made me untouchable. I was wrong. The betrayal didn't arrive loudly. It didn't come with shouting or dramatic accusations. It came disguised as normal. So normal that I almost missed it. That's what made it hurt more. By the time I understood what was happening, it had already settled into place. The exact moment it happened is burned into my memory. I was told something that didn't match reality. A decision had been made about me, without me, and it was presented as if I had agreed to it. At first, I laughed it off. I assumed there had been a misunderstanding. I assumed someone would correct it. No one did. Instead, the story about me continued to unfold, piece by piece, each detail slightly off, each assumption slightly twisted. I watched my version of events being replaced in real time. I felt my chest tighten as I realized I was losing control of my own narrative. That's when I understood who it was coming from. The person I trusted most was the source. Not a stranger, not an outsider, someone who knew my weaknesses, my sacrifices, and my fear of confrontation. Someone who knew exactly how to frame things so I would look unreasonable if I objected. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. My first reaction was denial. I told myself there had to be another explanation, that they wouldn't do this intentionally, that I must be misreading the situation. Accepting the truth felt more painful than doubting myself. But the evidence kept stacking up. Private conversations I was never part of, statements attributed to me that I never made, decisions justified using my silence that came from trust, not consent. I felt like I was being pushed into a corner where speaking up would make me look guilty and staying quiet would confirm the lie. The emotional impact was immediate and physical. My stomach sank, my hands shook. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every interaction felt loaded, like I was walking through a room full of traps. I replayed past moments in my head, searching for where I had gone wrong, wondering if I had somehow caused this. That inner conflict was exhausting. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to demand answers, to tear the false story apart. Another part of me froze. If I was wrong, I would destroy everything. If I was right, I would have to face the fact that I had been deliberately betrayed. So I waited. And that waiting became unbearable, because every hour of silence allowed the lie to grow stronger. People started reacting to me differently. Their tone changed, their expressions hardened. I could feel judgment forming before I even spoke. The worst part wasn't losing trust. It was realizing that my loyalty had been used as a weapon against me. I had protected someone who was quietly dismantling me. I had stayed quiet to preserve peace while they used my silence to rewrite reality. By the time I fully accepted the truth, the damage was already visible. And I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a betrayal, and it was far from over.
After the betrayal revealed itself, life didn't explode all at once. It tightened. Every day felt heavier than the last, like invisible pressure pressing down on my chest. I woke up already exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from anticipation. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't yet know how far it had gone. The clues started appearing everywhere. Short replies where there used to be conversations, avoided eye contact, plans changing at the last minute. I noticed how people stopped asking my opinion and started informing me of decisions instead. Each detail felt small on its own, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I began doubting myself constantly. Was I overthinking? Was I being paranoid? Was I imagining disrespect where none existed? That doubt was exactly what trapped me. Because while I questioned myself, the narrative about me continued to grow without resistance. I sensed it in the way people spoke around me, carefully, cautiously, like I was fragile or dangerous. I wasn't being confronted, I was being managed. The emotional pressure intensified. I felt like I was walking on unstable ground, one wrong step away from complete isolation. Speaking up felt risky. Staying silent felt suffocating. Either choice came with consequences I couldn't fully see yet. There were moments I tried to reclaim control. I asked neutral questions. I sought clarity without accusation, but the answers were vague, defensive, or dismissive. I was told everything was fine while being treated like it wasn't. That contradiction kept me off balance, unsure of which reality to trust. The sense of being trapped grew stronger. I realized I was being positioned as the problem without ever being told what the problem was. That's when fear crept in. Not fear of confrontation, but fear of being outnumbered by a version of events I didn't create. The stakes became clear. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about reputation, about belonging, about whether I would be allowed to exist in this space without constantly defending myself. If I lost this, I wouldn't just lose a relationship, I would lose my voice. The weight of that possibility sat with me constantly. I replayed conversations in my head late at night, analyzing tone, timing, and subtext. I watched people carefully, trying to read between the lines. Every small interaction felt loaded, as if one wrong move could trigger something irreversible. And through all of this, the person responsible stayed calm, almost detached. That calmness was unsettling. It told me this situation wasn't spiraling for them the way it was for me. They weren't reacting because they didn't need to. They were already in control. That realization changed everything. Because if I was feeling this much pressure without a direct confrontation, it meant something was being prepared, something larger than discomfort, something meant to corner me completely. I didn't know when it would happen. I didn't know how, but I could feel it approaching. And the closer it came, the more I understood one terrifying truth. Whatever was coming next would force me to either disappear quietly or finally fight back. The tension couldn't stay unspoken forever. There came a moment when silence felt more dangerous than confrontation. I could sense the walls closing in, the judgments solidifying, and the story about me settling into something permanent. If I didn't address it, I would be living inside a version of myself that wasn't true. So I confronted it, not with anger, not with accusations. I chose control. I chose calm. I believed that if I stayed composed, the truth would surface on its own. I believed honesty would be enough. I was wrong. The moment I raised the issue, I saw it, the shift, a subtle confidence in their posture, a lack of surprise. It was as if they had been waiting for me to speak, rehearsed and ready. What followed wasn't a conversation, it was a performance. My concerns were minimized, my emotions were reframed as instability. Every point I made was deflected, not denied,
twisted just enough to make me sound unreasonable. The more carefully I spoke, the more it felt like I was walking into traps already laid out. Then came the arrogance. They spoke with certainty, with authority, as if the outcome had already been decided. There was no curiosity in their response, no willingness to understand, only control, only superiority. That's when the cruelty showed itself, not openly, but strategically. A dismissive expression, a condescending tone, a single remark delivered lightly that made it clear they saw me as powerless, the kind of line meant to embarrass, not resolve, the kind meant to remind me of my position. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I realized this wasn't about truth. It was about dominance. They weren't interested in clearing misunderstandings because misunderstandings weren't the problem. The problem was that I had started questioning a system that benefited them, and for that, I needed to be put back in place. The emotional impact was overwhelming. My chest felt tight, my thoughts scattered. I could feel frustration rising, mixed with disbelief. I had walked into that conversation hoping for clarity and walked out understanding that I was being actively disrespected. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to expose everything I knew. But I stopped myself, because reacting emotionally would give them exactly what they wanted. That restraint hurt more than shouting ever could. I walked away feeling shaken, humiliated, and deeply aware of how close I was to breaking. The confrontation didn't resolve anything, it escalated it. The line had been crossed. There was no going back to polite silence. From that point on, the atmosphere changed. Interactions felt colder, tension lingered in every exchange. I could sense that I was being watched more closely now, measured for reactions, waiting to slip. That's when I understood the danger. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal anymore. I was dealing with someone who believed they had already won. And if I didn't change my approach soon, they would make sure I lost everything, publicly, quietly, and permanently. I didn't plan the turning point. It arrived quietly, almost casually, at a moment when I had stopped expecting anything to change. I was already preparing myself for damage control, for survival, for learning how to live with the truth being distorted around me. That's when something unexpected happened. A message came from someone I hadn't considered part of this at all, not close enough to be involved, not distant enough to ignore what they had seen. The timing felt strange, almost intentional, like it had been held back until I was ready to hear it. At first, I didn't open it. Part of me was exhausted from processing new information. Another part was afraid of what it might confirm. Because by then, I already knew the truth emotionally, I just didn't have proof. When I finally read it, everything shifted. The message wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional. It was factual, specific, calm, and that's what made it powerful. It describes conversations that happened without me, decisions that were framed differently depending on who was listening, patterns of behavior I had felt but couldn't articulate. For the first time, my experience was reflected back to me without distortion. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't alone. That validation hit harder than the betrayal itself. Then came the evidence, not in one overwhelming reveal, but in pieces, timelines lining up, statements contradicting each other, actions that suddenly made sense when viewed from the outside. The confusion that had been clouding my judgment began to lift, and with it, the fear. I stopped reacting emotionally and started observing strategically. I listened more than I spoke. I noted inconsistencies. I paid attention to what was said when certain people weren't present. The situation that once made me feel powerless now felt readable. The power balance shifted internally first.
I realized they were relying on my silence, my doubt, my hesitation. They believed I would protect the peace at my own expense, like I always had. But this time, something was different. I wasn't angry. I was clear. That clarity gave me control. I no longer felt the urge to explain myself or seek approval. I stopped chasing understanding from people who had already decided my role. Instead, I focused on facts, timing, and patience. The more I stepped back, the more visible their confidence became, and with it, their mistakes. They grew careless. Assumptions replaced caution. The story they had built started contradicting itself. I watched it happen without interference. That restraint was my strength. Because now, I wasn't trying to prove my innocence. I was waiting for the truth to surface on its own terms, in a way that couldn't be dismissed or twisted. I finally understood something important. Control doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from positioning. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't bracing for impact anymore. I was preparing for exposure. The truth didn't come out in the way I imagined. There was no dramatic announcement, no raised voices, no moment where I had to fight to be heard. What made it devastating was how inevitable it became. The truth surfaced because it could no longer stay hidden. The setting was familiar, the same kind of space where I had once been quietly humiliated. The same people, the same tension in the air. But this time, something felt different. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't defensive. I was steady. I had stopped trying to control the outcome. That's when the cracks finally showed. Small contradictions appeared first. Details that didn't align. Statements that didn't match earlier versions. I noticed people exchanging glances. Confusion replacing certainty. The story that had once sounded so confident began to feel unstable. Then came the moment everything shifted. Information surfaced, not from me, but from sources they didn't expect. Timelines were questioned, assumptions unraveled. The version of events that painted me as the problem started collapsing under its own weight. I watched it happen quietly. The same people who had avoided my eyes before now looked at me differently, not with sympathy, with realization. That realization was powerful. It carried weight, because it wasn't emotional, it was logical. The antagonists tried to regain control. Their tone changed, their confidence wavered. They explained too much, spoke too fast, filled silences that didn't need filling. Every attempt to fix the story only exposed how carefully it had been constructed in the first place. That was the moment of full exposure. The truth didn't need me to speak. It stood on its own, clear, undeniable. The manipulation was visible now, not as a feeling, but as a pattern. And once people see a pattern, they can't unsee it. I felt something release inside my chest. Years of self-doubt, swallowed words, and restrained reactions lifted all at once. Not because I had won, but because I was finally seen accurately. No exaggeration, no distortion. The emotional impact was overwhelming, but quiet. I didn't feel the urge to celebrate. I didn't feel the need to attack. What I felt was validation. Deep, grounding, irreversible. The kind that doesn't ask for approval. Justice didn't arrive as punishment. It arrived as clarity. The people who had believed the lie now had to sit with the truth. The person who orchestrated everything could no longer hide behind confidence or control. Their silence said more than any excuse ever could. And in that moment, the power fully shifted. Not because I took it, but because they lost it. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. My restraint spoke louder than defense ever could. The truth had done its work. As I walked away from that situation, I knew something had permanently changed. The narrative was no longer theirs. It was reality, and reality had finally caught up. After the truth surfaced, everything became quiet in a way I had never experienced before.
Not the uncomfortable silence of judgment, but the calm that follows clarity. The people who once looked at me with doubt now avoided the topic altogether. There were no apologies, no dramatic acknowledgments, just distance. And for the first time, that distance felt like relief. The consequences didn't arrive loudly. They arrived slowly. The person who had controlled the narrative lost influence without anyone announcing it. Their opinions carried less weight. Their certainty no longer guided decisions. I watched as their authority dissolved, not through confrontation, but through loss of credibility. And I realized something important. Exposure doesn't destroy people. It removes the mask. As for me, I didn't rush to reclaim space. I stepped back intentionally. I needed time to process what had happened, to sit with the reality that someone I trusted had chosen control over connection. That truth hurt more than the betrayal itself, but it also freed me from the illusion I had been protecting for years. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant understanding my role in allowing things to go this far. I had mistaken endurance for strength, silence for maturity, loyalty for safety. I began setting boundaries without explaining them. I stopped over-justifying my decisions. I chose self-respect even when it felt unfamiliar. The emotional weight didn't disappear overnight. There were moments when memories resurfaced, the humiliation, the doubt, the fear. But they no longer defined me. They reminded me of how far I had come, of how much I had survived without losing my integrity. I walked away with something more valuable than revenge. I walked away with clarity. I no longer needed validation from people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I no longer felt responsible for maintaining relationships that required self-erasure. The peace I found wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, grounding, and real. That experience changed how I see trust. I now know that true loyalty doesn't demand silence. It doesn't punish honesty, and it never requires humiliation to maintain control. If this story connected with you, if you've ever felt erased, misrepresented, or quietly betrayed, you're not alone. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment if you've lived through something similar, and subscribe because sometimes telling the truth is the first step toward reclaiming yourself.